Cool, and thank you for attending today's session. Today we're going to talk about SAP PI PO DevOps, what's possible, why you want to do it, and I do hope that you hear me. Yes, we are recording it. Hopefully I just enabled this, and we will also post the recording at figaf.com/webinar afterwards, so you can share it with your team members if there is something that you saw today that was interesting and you wanted to check out on. Good. So, yes, some of the other times we forgot to record it, but I think I'm doing good now. Let me just check the other one. So we are both recording in the webinar and we have our separate one to deal with it. Cool. So let's get started. DevOps. Want to talk about why PIPO is still relevant. Then we want to talk about how can you transport content. We may dive into testing. I don't know if that is a topic. I think the other project about the DevOps and being able to configure is probably more important for most scenarios. Then we'll talk about how to get started. What is it that this actually contain and what you can actually do with these scenarios. So we started out 7 years ago about building a tool to create a test case for PI, because when I was working with PI, a lot of times I said, well, I don't want to create this test case. We just will send some messages through in some of the different formats, either using the test tool built-in or message mapping, and it's like, it's not really a good way to do it. And then when we were building this, we found that to do this effectively, we needed to build a good tool that could monitor the PI system about what was changing, because that would enable us to also activate traces in the correct way. And that added our governance. Then since we had the governance, we might as well add it to a transport capability and being able to transport these things. We added CPI, API management, and migration. And obviously that is still an interesting topic, but that is for a different day. If you have questions, just put them into the Q&A section. I know some of you already done that so far. Cool. One question before we get started is probably something about where do you actually spend the most of your time when working with these things, and how much, what's actually the effort involved. So whenever you're doing a transport, how long time does it take to do this? So it obviously depends a lot, but I have worked different places where there's been a lot of challenges about going through these different scenarios, being able to document what has happened, who made changes, and all of these different things. And this just makes it a lot more complicated to work with the integrations and the landscapes, understanding what's going on. So let's just close this one and go back to our list here of QSA. And so this is obviously important, and so somewhere around 4 hours is the most people would be spending the time on it. And if we look at this, so I know, yes, I'm coming from the background about, well, we want to migrate all of this stuff because that is obviously an interesting business for us, because it may makes you rethink your landscape, what's going on, rebuilding processes, delivering much better integration. Integration Suite is really a nice platform. It does allow you to work smoother with your integration. It simplifies a lot of things, and I think a lot of the things that we are actually also going to talk about here today is if you ran it in cloud integration, it would be a lot easier because all your artifacts is put into one package that is transported, whereas in CPI you have multiple different packages, a lot of different places you can extend it, and this makes the governance a lot more challenging. So as I see it, so we do have some limitation on B2B flows. We do have an on-prem. I know it's on the roadmap, but one of the challenges I have with the integration itself is how many of you guys will actually be able to run a Kubernetes cluster with this in. I think obviously it's done and a lot of people are doing it, but the amount of basis people I've talked with that needed were complaining about why we needed this separate Java for the PI system long time ago was huge. And yeah, it's just one of the things that is going on. And then obviously if you have more than like 500 integrations, it makes sense to consider, okay, so how long time is this going to take? If you have less, you can probably migrate pretty fast, and get on with using integration suite there. So one of the things was we were working with a large customer, and they had a large PI PO landscape with a lot of different systems, a lot of different components that they needed to work with to be able to deliver integration in a good way. And this was some of the challenges that they faced, and I think this is also applicable to a lot of you guys. So the basis for whenever they needed to do any changes was that, and I'll just give me a thumbs up if that is some of the things that you resonate with, is that a lot of the times when I work with customers, there's two approaches for the governance. One is I, as a developer, have full access and can just move my integration into production, and so write an email saying I've moved it into productions. That is pretty fast, but not really good governance. The other process is that I write in some location or in some document, this is the objects, the ICO, the function message mappings, the communication channels that needs to be transported. And then once this has been done, you would then write it in an Excel sheet that this is the things that we need to move, and this is how we think this should be configured in production and in QA. And I think this is the process most companies have that does integration in a good way. You take all of the integration, move it, send this document to someone, and then you sit together with that person and say, okay, this is how we are configuring this communication channel. And obviously it depends a lot about how skilled they are in working with PI and doing governance, all of these different things. So they wanted to move away from this and just have an easy way to deal with it. They also wanted to automatically configure communication channels. So instead of having these Word documents and approving the Word documents and have someone else to do it, and I don't know if they also had some review afterwards to see if it was applied correctly. If we can do it in one go, it simply sims the process. They also had some challenge about changing ICOs. So they were doing an S4 project and they had a system called EAPD, and then they want to change this system name to a HANA system name, so they would easily be able to switch between these two components, making it a lot faster to deliver integrations and projects. They also had, so when they're doing a transport, and I think that is one of the challenges that a lot of customers are facing, you have an ICO with 100 different receivers. You want to transport this, but you don't want to transport everything. You just want to transport one or two of these connections, and then the system breaks down because it becomes challenging. You have something about some rollback of directory transport, so you can apply something, roll it back, automated partner creations, and then the last thing we added was also a batch upload of parameters. Let's go through some of these. So in the Figaf tool, we have created a one tool that allows you to handle all of these different configurations, making it easier for you to manage your SAP integrations. All changes that you do is configured in the system, and you can also do testing. So that means that if you have test cases for a given scenario, you can use them whenever you are modifying this. And it will enable you to have all the context that you need, so you know who made changes to the system. You can find out the reason why they did it, or you can find out why they did not do these things. So let's talk about some of these things. So yeah, and if you have questions along the way, just go into the Q&A and put in your comments there. So one of the challenges that we found was that the way we set this up is that we have a landscape, and a landscape consists of a transition from one system to another one. We could reuse the system in both cases, so from one to another system, that would be one transition, but it could also be the same system. We changed this also so you could see the progression in the landscape when you moved an ICO further on in the landscape. We set up mappings between agents, so you can convert systems between one system and another. We have substring replacement, so you don't need to remember, if I change this HTTP or this S4 HANA backend system, what is it actually in the QA system? And that is one of the things that few developers remember, and they need to go and check all the time. If we can automate that, there's no need for you to remember these values. And then we talk about communication channels. So it is really difficult. Well, so obviously the idea is you transport these things. You say, okay, to whoever handles the transport, I've transported these. These are the parameters you go to change. And if the persons there do not really understand these parameters, I'll just put them in and no questions asked, which is really a little bad about why do you want to set someone else to handle these things if they can all be handled internally. We make it easier. Obviously, one of the challenges for passwords, you would need to configure those yourself because that is not, they are not public accessible, the passwords. They were in older versions, but not in newer versions of PI. So we need to remember and enter those, but obviously they will be saved under the system. We also have, we can also talk about approval of this, because as a developer, whenever I make a change, I'd like to have someone else to approve and say, okay, this is what I wanted, and with that, give the user that context that is needed to handle these scenarios. And once it is approved, it is also the things that will actually be triggered. But and I guess also we want to be able to do rollbacks. We want to be able to take, okay, say we have this configuration, we apply it, and then after a period of time, or if it fails, we can roll back and say, okay, oh, that was not it right now, make some modification and apply it again. The rollback obviously have some limitations. We cannot roll back forever, and only if you have not made modifications to certain objects. So, yes. Any questions on these topics? Otherwise, I think let's get into it. I think that the last one I also wanted to cover is this batch update about being able to take a lot of communication channels and apply it in just one go without having to configure all of this for different scenarios. But let's try to get started and show you what this would actually look like. And then you can say whether or not you think this will be faster than how you're currently working with your SAP integration. Oh. And yeah, questions, just put them into the Q&A section. Okay, so here we have the Figaf tool, and here we can see that the different landscapes that we have created in our system. The first thing we want to go is we want to find a tracked object. So the way the Figaf tool works is that it continuously fetches all the information about your PI system, what is going on. So we can do a synchronization that will download all the objects on this PI system, and with that we can see, okay, so who have made which changes to an object. So let's just see here, I have an ICO I wanted to test on. It is in namespace 11. So we can see here we have this one namespace 11. It has 4 revisions, so we can open it, we can check the versions, we can compare it, and we can then see, okay, so what was actually changed between these versions. So it seems like it is just the header data. That's probably something also with a communication channel, where that one was also changed in some way. Okay, so that's all good. So let's say we have this ICO here, and we want to transport it to our QA environment. The idea is we will assign it to a ticket. We will say webinar. We will give it a reason, 12. We will also give it as a Jira ID, so we know, or whatever ticket system you have, so you always have a way to go back from the object here in Figaf and find the reason why someone made this change. And then we need to select a landscape, and here we can select either the one that just transported to the same landscape or the one that transported to the new system. It all works the same way. Obviously, if you transport in the same system, there's some limitations, and it works in a little different way, making some of these processes a little simpler. Okay. So right now I have my ICO. I can attach all the dependent objects that we have here. And one thing we can obviously create the communication channels also with all the ESR objects. And that would also be a part of our transport, but that just takes a little long, so just delete this from this. We may be able to check it later. So right now in our ticket, the only thing we have is the ESR components, or the directory components of this. So next is as we look up the different test cases we have for this scenario. And we have some scenario here. I'll just take this first test case. And the idea is then from here we can actually create and run the test cases that are related to these objects. But because we have some objects that's being reused, it finds out that there's, or systems, it finds a lot more systems that we can run and see, okay, so let's try also to check all of these different things. So let's see here, it has processed, we can pull the messages, which means it will download all the messages. We can see everything is successful, nothing has changed. And this just makes it so much easier to test a change. You can select all the things that the system thinks could be affected by this, and then you are good to go. So we go back to our ticket here. Here we can then now start the transport. And in this transport, we now have, so if we had also selected the ESR, we will also have some objects for each ESR transport, and we would need to go in and approve this. Okay, the first thing is, let's check this change overview here. Here can we see, okay, so if we apply this, what is the change that is actually being applied here? Here we can see, okay, it seems like there was a password that was not configured in before, and that could be a change that affected us. Okay. Then let's look at this parameters file here. So here we have the communication channels. We can switch the decentral adapter engine if you're doing that. We can see all of the parameters here, so we can easily filter and show non-transportable. We can show things that is being changed between the different landscapes. And here we can see we have some passwords, we have some data that is needed here, and we can configure whether or not we want this. So We can, as a user, just go in here and say, okay, put in the, yeah, that's fine, just put it in repository, that's probably okay, and then save it. So as a user, I'll go through all of these things. If I have search replacements, I will go through and just activate all of those. Or I would never actually see that there is something that needed to be changed. I can then now download this parameter file, and it is called 48. And here we are opening this CSV file. So this is all the externalized parameters of, or all the parameters of this transporter. We obviously also have to for CPI, where you can also go through this list. The first thing you probably want to do is you want to add filters, and then we can go through. I can say, okay, let's select the non-transportable, and for our purpose it really does not matter because all of these are kind of the same thing. So we can see here we have this URL here. So let's just put in webinar. As the URL for this. And obviously you can go through this, search and replace, and find all of the different ones that make sense. We can see it all actually already found out that the user was called repository here. And then we just say, okay, whether or not it should inherit the data from the source system or from the target system, or it should apply the changes here. So here we want to make changes, so we just say, okay, no, use it. We can see all the different parameters that exist here. So let's just change this one and say no here. And now press save. And then when I go back here, I can upload it. Hopefully we've selected the right one. We can see here at inherit from source, this parameter has changed, this URL has been changed, and this user have also been changed. So all of the things that we specified in this CSV report has been updated here. And we just say submit. And if I then open this this channel again, select the non-transportable, we should be able to see that it has changed these parameters as we wanted to do in the target system. Okay, so this is all about the channels, and I think that is really a large part of these things. We can also do a lot of other things. So let's say we have this, so the IQ is from SAP ERP, and then it goes to this ERP here. So we can take the ERP, and we can then rename this. So if we just wanted to go and say, okay, hey, let's call it rename ERP webinar. I just need to hope it is not a business component, or that we would need also in this XSD. So now we have done this, we made a change then to it. So if I look at this one, we can see that it is changing this over here, and it says this is actually not in the target system. So I can't remember if it also fetched the different users' passwords. So it also remembered the changes that we did for this scenario. So we can change systems between these. So and then once you have made a change for system once, it will remember that forever until you override it again and say, okay, it's a different system. So this enables us to just transport these things. If we look at the changes overview, and this is a way to understand what is actually being changed by this import. So as a user, I can see, okay, so this is actually all the changes that we're doing. On the router, we are deleting this ERP, we are deleting this one, and we are creating a new ERP and these kind of things. So with this, you can actually see, okay, let's see what this impact will have on our system. I'm not really sure, or if you wanted to do this manually, I think you probably will forget about it and not just say, okay, I think I have an idea about what is going on. But now you can actually see all the changes that is going to happen for these scenarios. So that was And then the last thing, we can also, on the ICO, we can go in and say, okay, we have these conditions. We can go in here and we can, so we can either just go in and say, okay, exclude some elements here. We can go in and say, okay, we want to change this to at different parameters, or we want to duplicate it and say have multiple different scenarios in. And then if I press save, or we can filter out and say we only want to send to certain receivers. Okay. So that was actually all we needed. I'll send it to approval. And now, as an approver, I can import, or I can approve it, I can decline it. That would just leave us back to start, and we would need to make these changes. So I will just activate it. And let me just see if I can get the SAP system. Any question on this? Just put them into the chat. But I hope you did see some of the different ideas that it is able to handle all of these different scenarios without you needing to specify a lot of different settings on this this channel. So now we can see some of this was not changed because they already existed in the target system. If I then find this ICO, so let's see if I can find it. It is on here in the target system. It is called SAP PIP invoice 0201. SAP PIP invoice 01. It is under 11. We can see here that the conditions were applied. We can see it is called ERP webinar, and if you look at the receivers here, I don't think we can make changes here. We can see this proxy here, where we can see that it has changed the parameter to webinar. So we have all of the ability to change end-to-end in the tool, having full documentation of all these different changes. And then let me just show you what it would look like in the productive system, or in the test system or productive system. It is anyway the same thing. So here I can see we have this ICO here. I can look at the tickets that has been assigned to it. I can see it links to this one. So I can go all back and forth between the changes that have been applied and what you actually are seeing in this scenario. And this just makes it so much easier to filter and understand your landscape. And here we can see we have 12 revisions. We can compare these two between each other and see if something has happened here. So, and this is one of the challenges. So if you just look at these changes in here in the ICO, it becomes a little easier or a little challenging to see what's actually being changed between these scenarios. So is this something you can do in your systems today whenever you're making modifications of your ICOs? Let me just see if there's any questions. Like to hear your input. Are there something that you think, I do this all the time? Is there a way we can simplify these this process? Just open the Q&A and then put in your questions, and I'll try to also cover those things. Because yeah, this is about what challenges that you are actually facing for these scenarios and how to deal with it. Good. Nothing new. Okay. Let's see. So one of the other things I talked about is obviously testing. And since we started out with a testing tool, it is pretty easy to create test cases for this. And the idea is obviously that you create a test case by selecting an ICO. You create a recording, and then you have different ways of creating recordings for this. You can either record the message in the what's it called, the module chain, or we can record it inside of the ICO, the logging steps that you have there. So it all depends on what you have set up, and it's one of the things that we are improving, because we think it should be a lot easier for you to create test cases, both to run, but also when you need to get into a CPI mode, then you can reuse the same test cases to also test your migrated scenario. So it is all one end-to-end scenarios that you can use this this for. But let me just show you the effort of creating a new test case for this. So the idea is we go here to our ICO. We can obviously select multiple if we wanted to. Now I just want to create one. We can say record messages, create a new test suite. Do I still have this in there? We can fetch future messages. I think this is the default. We can also have specific messages. But let's use this. We can add an expression, so we can group all of these into an existing scenario. And the idea is here you want to specify, and if you have specific scenario, you can also extract content from CSV that would allow you to, or from the XML to do this. And this could either be the purchase order number or type, or other information. So let's just say we'll take this one. And that means that now it will check for the system if we can record these messages and how that would look like. So now I need to send some messages on this interface. 2, 3. So now I have sent 3 messages on this, and I'll pull messages. Oops. See if it fetched it already. Oops. And yeah, doing demos live is always a lot more fun. So let's just try again. Copy, fetch future message. We can also just say specific messages to see if we have anything here. So this is some of the things that sometimes happens, that we go and we make changes to certain things. So we'll add module, skip third stage. So it can add this module by itself if there's anything that you need to do for this. And let's just create a new one. Copy, expression. So let's see. Pull messages. Okay. Something is not really working as expected. We can definitely run them. I'm checking on the wrong system. So I'm trying on the 74 system. So let me just try to see if that will work. So let's pull here. So now we have created from our from our test system. We can then create a test case for this. And then the problem is that we have some messages coming in here, and we have this line item. And the problem here is that line item should also be ordered. And to do that, we need to make a modification. And that means we go to the testing here. We need to add an oppression ID that will fetch the ID and use that as a way to test these data. So if we now do it here, we can go in here, we can go into the details here, calculate order number. So now we should hopefully, if I specified correctly, we can see that these, okay. So at least we can see we can pull these. I probably had a few steps that I forgot to save in or something like that. But the idea is that you add this expression, it will figure out how to handle these messages because these messages is duplicate, and then it knows how to order these. And this is obviously also used when you are migrating to integration suites. Just see if there is just so test ID recording requests. Okay. Alright, let's just skip it here and continue. So obviously one of the key aspects here is about improving the governance, giving you this audit trail, and you probably have a lot of documents about showing this is how you're fetching data, this is the things that we are making of changes you're updating into Jira, ServiceNow, or whatever ticketing system that you have and get tasked for. But it is really a lot of work for developers to go through and configure all of these different things and update it, make sure that it's actually relevant, because if you just update something but not the whole thing and not really, and sometimes you forget it, it becomes really difficult to actually understand what is going on. Good. So let's see. And you obviously say, well, we do have CTS Plus. It does all of these different things. It is correct. It does help you with the transport. But there's a lot of gaps in this. So obviously all of the externalized configuration, the documentation of what has changed, the versioning. In CPI and PI, you can always see versions. But if a developer or a basis guy have been in afterwards making modifications to a communication channels, it is really difficult to see why this actually happened, who did it, and what was the reason for it. And yeah, it is still a lot of manual works that you need to fill in for all of these different Excel sheets. And then afterwards, it is a lot of manual work to complete this. And on top of that, ideally, you probably also need someone to go in afterwards and review, did they actually do the things that they were supposed to do? So if you have this complex process, this makes really a lot of sense, because then you just have the part that is being deployed, and you're giving the responsibility to the people that understands it, and are taking some responsibility of the integration, what is going on, who made changes, etc. Did I miss something in this section? Would be interesting to know. Okay, so as a developer basis, some of the things that you would see is that this will speed up the process. So some of the scenarios that this customer were using was that they had to change an ICO from one system, from one sender system to another. I think they estimated that it would take 4 or 5 weeks, and with the Figaf tool they did it in a couple of hours. They had obviously spent some time on all of this development, but once you sign up for the Figaf tool, you will actually get this as a part of the service, making it a lot easier for you to get started with these scenarios without having to consider, build, and handle these different things. So it speeds up the development process, it lowers the cost of deployment, because you don't need to spend so much effort on setting up these things. Improve the governance, you can create a lot of documentations about what has changed, you can compare message mapping, you can compare or create IQ documentation. I haven't shown that, but it will create the normal Excel sheet that we see about documents that has been created. It removes a lot of the boring part. I don't really think that there's anyone that enjoys going in and applying configurations after something has been done. And more importantly, it does make you more happy not having to deal with these things. And I think that is pretty good value that you'll see. Okay. We obviously also have something for Integration Suite, and we'll not go into this. We have some other webinars you can see on figaf.com/webinar, where we go through this DevOps process also for PI, where it's a lot more also advanced. obviously for migration purposes also. But I guess your manager will not really appreciate you saying you will be happier having a tool. There is also some hardcore facts about, okay, so if you deal with this, what is it that you will be saving on this? And obviously this depends a lot about the factors that you have in this. But let's say you have 20 transports a month times 8 hours to do a transport. Times a rate, that is 60,000 a year. And the Figaf tool will start at like 10,000 euros a year. So it's a pretty no-brainer to get the tool to handle these transports, because it will boost the productivity of developers, as we talked about. You will have fewer errors. You can configure all of these different things. And also, when you're onboarding new developers, the effort of getting them to understand your system and processes will be a lot easier, because here there's one tool that covers all of the different documentation. The only thing you need to know is, do I put the Jira, the ServiceNow incident in, and then everything else is pretty much standard processes for these things. Yeah, implementation plan. It obviously depends, but one of the things that you can actually do is you can run the Figaf tool on your laptop connected to a dev and a test system. You can try some transport and you will see how fast it would actually work. Then install it on a server, and then configure the landscape, and then roll out the tool to the organization. I have done scenarios where we have spent an hour on installing this, getting it up and running. Then a little longer if you needed to get an extra server to run this on. But in general, it is pretty easy. And yeah, then you can get some help on getting started, transporting these different things. But in general, like half a day of workshop, we have transported the first couple of scenarios, done the migrations of these ones. So it really speeds up the process of this. So if this is something you're interested in, book a call with me, your manager, or let's figure out how to do a proof of concept of this and showing how this can actually bring value to the way you're delivering integrations. You can obviously sign up for a free trial of the tool. And here's the different editions. This is the DevOps edition. We do not have Git integration for PI, because it does not make a lot of sense as I see it. But here's some estimates of pricing, and obviously it depends on your scenarios. Next week we're also doing a similar edition. There we'll talk about how you can actually develop faster in cloud integration. If you have not signed up, you can go to figaf.com/webinar and sign up, and there we'll go through all of these different scenarios, like test-driven development, Groovy XSLT editing, and actually one thing that we could reuse would be the XSLT editing. That could be a feature that you could actually potentially also use from a PI if you wanted to leverage XSLT better, but it is not something we have as a part of the release at the moment. So that was all I wanted to cover in this session today. If you have questions, comments, yeah, put them into the Q&A. If I hope you liked it, today's sessions, and want to see more, and hope you see you on next week. And I do hope that you also give this a try and see, okay, this would really speed up my delivery process. So that was what I wanted to cover. Now time for Q&A. Please put it into the chat what you have, and I'll try to cover those things.